Reddit, what was your, oh shit, this person is a psychopath moment, when meeting people? A kid I went to primary school with, invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him, because it was a private school, and he was only a student there, because his dad was a groundskeeper. I didn't want to go, but didn't want to be a D, like everyone else, so, I said yes, but I couldn't stay long. We went behind his house, and there were several bare spots in the grass. Some of them a single stick sticking up in the middle, while others had a thin plastic tube poking out. He was very excited, as he started digging up one of the spots, with a hose poking out. He pulled up a jar with a dead baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid, to let air in. He went on to tell me, he likes burying things alive. Sometime, he seals the jar tight, sometimes, gives an air hose, and even puts a little food and water in, to keep them alive longer. He said, you can't bury them too deep, or you can't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally, he would pour water down the tubes to drown the animal. I was 8 to 10 years old at that time. I'm 52 now, and it still makes me sick, to think about that. I was friends with a couple. The wife made up an affair with me, to hurt the husband's feelings. The husband showed up in my condo with a gun, and was detained by the security guards, and later the police. I had no idea about any of it, until later, when the condo security contacted me. It's crazy, how you can just be dragged into a situation, that can easily get you killed. The fact she tried to hurt his feelings that way, makes it clear, it's a very unhealthy relationship. I was hanging out with a gay friend of mine, once, and found myself alone with a woman I'd just met. So, she starts coming onto me hard. Now I may be a bit clueless, but this set off alarms in my reptilian hindbrain, and so nothing happened between us. Later she confessed, that she was trying to get me drunk and horny, so, my friend could then step in, and coerce me into sex with him. People do some crazy-ass shit, for sure. I, 20F, was dating this dude, 23M, for a few months, and we were getting on really well, then we both ended up having to move for our jobs, at around the same time. He wants to try long distance, so we do. We call most days, and watch movies together in our off time. The time zones mess it up a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. Out of the blue, one day, he just says, he doesn't want to be together. I'm like, wow, okay, a little blindsided, but sure. So, I start just going about normal life again, and hanging out with friends, the normal post-relationship stuff. After about a month, he begs, like absolutely begs to get back together. Movie-type stuff, sending flowers to me at work, sending handwritten cards almost daily across thousands of miles, and even bought me a ticket to fly out to see him. So, I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll go, and see what he has to say. Worst case scenario, I just fly home. So, I got a ticket for 2 days after, because I just figured I could head out if he was being a D. He picks me up from the airport and is basically how he used to be. Just telling me he missed me, and he regretted it as soon as it happened and it was the biggest mistake of his life, the usual. So, we stay with his family, because he's like, oh please don't get a hotel, I already feel bad enough about the whole month, just stay with us. And I just thought hey, free room I guess. Everything is completely fine for the first few days, and then I get this alert on my phone, and it's a hurricane warning, and saying, they're pushing my flight for 4 days later. I'm like, crap. I need to get back to work. I only took like 3 days. When he gets back to the house from work, I tell him about it, and he's like, oh, I know. We already started boarding up the windows. I was a little freaked out but not too much, because I guess that's normal for big hurricanes. So, the next morning, he shakes me, and wakes me up, and tells me to come to the living room. I was like, okay. When I do, it's him, his 2 brothers, his sister, his mom, and his dad, people I have only met on this one instance, and he is a binder. They sit me down, and each of them reads a passage from the binder of why we shouldn't be together, and why I need to move on, and he breaks up with me, in his parents' house, in front of his siblings, in the middle of a hurricane power outage. Then, because of the hurricane, I was stuck there for 4 more days with these freaks. Probably not the most psychopath person I've met, but this story is still just so strange to me, I had to post it. Edit, the most psychopathic person, was a friend from high school, whose whole family peed in the bathtub. The toilet was only, for number 2. Was walking my dog down a main road, on lead, a lady was walking her dog off lead. Her dog stopped in the road, causing cars to stop. She had no control of it. Her dog lunged for my dog. I asked her to put her dog on a lead. She said she will stamp on my dog's head and let her dog kill mine. I knew it wasn't even worth arguing with crazy, so I carried on my walk. She then set her house on fire 2 weeks later, with her children inside. Luckily they were okay, but yeah, madness. Edit cause I can't respond to every comment lol. Yes, I made a statement. Yes, she's currently in prison, was released after the arson. Then rearrested for further crimes. Her children are aged 4 to 7. And the dog is also okay. Was chatting away with a guy in a pub. Seemed like a normal nice dude, got on really well. Some point in the conversation, he casually mentions he's not long out the jail for torturing a guy. He never said torturing, he said what it was he did to him. He slipped it into the conversation so casually, as if he was telling me about running to the shop for a pint of milk. Never saw it coming. Asked around another day, and confirmed he wasn't full of shit. Had something similar happen when I was in college. The guy I was chatting with seemed fairly genuine, and also just casually brought up he had gotten out of prison for second-degree murder. Afterwards, he asked me what I was going to school for, and I answered honestly, criminal justice. It was a fair exchange of being honest with one another, that he said, if I were a cop, which I'm not, and never plan to be, he would respect our encounter, just based off of treating each other like humans. We continued our conversation, and asked him what helped him during his time in, and he answered, religion and studying. He ended up being a foreman for a construction company, and assimilating well, in my opinion. This story makes me angry. So, one time, a friend came over, and brought a new friend with them. Seemed like a nice guy. He was a quiet, and kept to himself. I was a young, single woman, and far too trusting of people at the time, I think. So, my friend mentions that this guy has just recently got out of prison. I ask him what he went away for. He then proceeds to tell me that he and his friends had followed a young girl into a local park, and raped her, using various sharp objects they found on the ground. They each got extremely long sentences. This happened to be 12 years. What made everything worse was that he ends the story with the fact that she killed herself because she couldn't live with what they did to her. Needless to say, he was never allowed around my home again. And I had a very stern talk with my so-called friend. Edit, just to clarify, the guy friend I got rid of him quick sticks, but I felt unsafe and had to do so over a short time period. The fact that he had associated with such scum, and that I was a young lady, living alone at the time, was the reason he only got a stern talking to. My brother. As a kid, he used to enjoy watching animals die. As an adult, there were plenty of moments which reminded me that he was little changed. The scary thing was the complete indifference he would display when you tried to explain why doing stuff like this was wrong. It was like the thing that would normally, naturally, horrify people, overcommitting such incidents, was just completely lacking in him. Serial killer in the making. Geesh. Yeah, pretty much. He even once drowned a neighbor's cat to death in a sink, because he didn't like it in his garden. As a kid, he used to enjoy drowning rats a lot. It was an Uber driver. My wife and I took an Uber down to the bars one weekend. Once he picked us up, I could easily tell he was on something. While we were crossing a bridge on the interstate, about halfway to our destination, he says, "Isn't it crazy that I could swerve off the road and kill us all right now?" I told him to get off on the next exit, and canceled the ride. I also reported him to Uber, so, hopefully, nobody has to get in a car with that lunatic again. I met the new boyfriend of an acquaintance, and within 10 minutes of the conversation, he was referring to women as holes. It was amazing how I suddenly remembered that my husband had requested I come help him with something. Sounds like the same type of guy that would lose his shit if another man were to refer to him as a hole. Man forgot he is holes, too. Went on a date once, and she casually dropped how she killed her brother's hamster with perfume as a kid, because she was mad at him, like it was just a quirky little story to laugh about. Needless to say, I started looking for an exit strategy at that point. At a party in high school or just after it, we were doing late-night juvenile things, like Truth or Dare. I knew most people there pretty well, except the new boyfriend of my friend's sister. I'm not entirely certain how it came up, but he admitted to the entire group that he had sexually assaulted a dog. We were drunk and high, but everyone sobered up with that. We were too young to know what to do with that information, but we all just shut up and quickly left the party. She broke up with him not long after. I can't imagine doing something that awful to a helpless animal, but admitting it to a group of strangers seemed downright sociopathic. I was glad to never see his face again. There was a guy at my high school that said that. He also was a racist, which was a motivating factor when he asked another friend to give him a black eye, so he could call out of work, saying he was mugged by black guys. My friend figured he'd find someone else to help him, so why not get a good punch in on him? A guy I went to high school with is now on the sex offender registry for sodomizing a dog. He was a little weird in high school, he was picked on a lot for it, and I genuinely felt sorry for him. I was always friendly with him and a few others that were relentlessly picked on. But dear God, I never would have thought he was capable of something like that. That poor dog. She came late to our date, immediately ordered a drink and burger, then told me she was late because of a family thing. Before the burger arrived, she mentioned she'd have to cut our date short because she was having a family dinner. I was like, okay, all good. Then she told me that the craziest thing had happened where her sister met a dude on Tinder, and they ended up going to a family barbecue, and it ended up with them getting married. Before her burger even arrived, she said, "Wouldn't it be funny to pull a prank on my family? Like, you and me went to my family barbecue, and let everyone assume we were really hitting it off, and they'd totally think we were gonna get married." I'll admit, I'm also the psychopath in this story, 'cause I went. Good mashed potatoes. She spent all night introducing me as her future fiancé, and I had to take a Tinder break after that. At a party once, I met a friend of a friend who worked as a nurse at a local hospital. She was of the sort who would sigh heavily and use the unique stresses of her job to bring her the attention she was looking for. She took the spotlight with pleasure and started talking about how hard her job was. When I asked if there were things she liked about her job, she beamed and explained that she worked primarily in maternity. However, her anecdotes had nothing to do with mothers or infants. She spoke primarily of how wonderful it was to be in charge of these women's lives. She explained how fragile they were in those moments, and how even after delivery, she was the only one on the floor for hours who would be able to forecast if there was going to be life-changing complications. She absolutely glowed as she explained how these people's lives were in her hands. The conversation steered in other directions amongst partygoers, but she reclaimed it on the topic of high school experiences. She shared an anecdote on how she was rejected for an advanced choir position, and blamed it solely on the poor judgment of the instructor. Years later, she got to sing at the instructor's funeral. I'll never forget the pride she took in having control over other people's lives. It struck me as the most basic display of evil. That seems to be somewhat common in the nursing field. I dated a nurse that helped physically and mentally disabled children. She turned out to be a nightmare. After sharing a long list of experiences I'd had with her to a therapist, they deemed her a narcissistic sociopath. Probably should have bailed when she told me a story, while laughing, about catching her ex-husband in bed with another woman, and her first instinct was to grab a metal baseball bat and start beating him and the other woman with it. I also found out later that she has a repeated history of assaulting her partners, and then calling the police to say she was the one assaulted, giving herself marks before the cops come, and then doing everything in her power to take ownership of any of their belongings she has access to. I could go on for days about the unhinged stuff she's done. Nurse here. 80% of us are here because we didn't know what to do with our lives, family tradition, or we thought caring for people would be fulfilling. But there is 1 in 5 that are just off. Just weird individuals that make your skin crawl. Some of the good ones enjoy the responsibility of someone being vulnerable to them, but in a good way. They genuinely want to feel important to them and help them. Others are effing crazy. I've been a public school teacher for a decade. I've only ever been scared of one student. First of all, this was in my first few years of teaching. This student was of myth in my school. I taught at an alternative school for students that had been expelled from every other school, but overall, my students were chill. They weren't good students, but if you met them at their level, things were usually fine. The exception was JT. JT was a sophomore when I met him, but at that point, I didn't teach him, but boy, did I hear about him. Somehow, His mom was able to game the paperwork and education system enough that this kid was unpunishable. Everything was technically covered under a litany of 504 plans and IAP paperwork, so much so that this kid literally pushed a 8-month pregnant teacher down, and he was back 2 weeks later. He could literally punch a kid in the mouth and be back 2 days later, and because of this, he was just a massive problem. The first terrifying discovery for me was that his mom was very vocal about not wanting him home because she was scared of him. She had a good reason to be. JT, as a small child, tried to murder his family by lighting their house on fire, specifically trying to murder his brother by duct taping him to his bed while he slept. His brother survived, but had horrific burns, but somehow that didn't stop him from supporting his almost murderous brother. JT was ruthless, but he was also about 5 feet 4 inches, and his Kruger brother was about 6 foot, and much physically stronger. I finally had the pleasure of teaching JT in his senior year. He had approximately 10 credits, all gym-based, and was nowhere near graduation. My first note was that this is the only kid I've ever met that just had nothing going on behind his eyes. He was shark-like, he never smiled or laughed, unless someone got hurt. Cruel for cruelty's sake. One day, JT wasn't there, which, frankly, was odd. He had a great drug business going at school, and he only had to avoid one cop. The next day, we found out why he wasn't there. JT murdered a kid. Shot him in the face, for $12, and a little bit of weed. His lawyer tried to get his sentence lowered, by arguing that it was technically his first offense, since everything else happened when he was a kid. He got 25 to life. After moving to a new city, a few years ago, my best friend came to visit. We're both 30-something dudes. We were out at a bar, when a guy asked to sit with us, because there weren't any free tables outside. Fine. Being polite, we start talking to the guy. He told us he was a truck driver just stopping overnight in town, and at some point mentioned he was ex-military. From there, things began to get strange, but slowly, like the proverbial frog in water being brought to a boil. Not only was he in the military, but he had a brother, it might have been a twin, I can't recall, who was in the CIA, embedded in Russia. My friend and I also gradually got the sense that this guy was a little too interested in us. We eventually closed our tabs and decided to go to a different bar, but the guy stuck with us, telling increasingly tall tales about his time in the military. He eventually confessed that there was no brother, he was the spy who'd been embedded in Russia. What struck me was how, even though his stories got more and more ridiculous, his demeanor was deadly serious, if a bit overwrought. And the intensity was starting to make my skin crawl. Not only that, but he was starting to pick fights with other people at the bar, deliberately being belligerent. Over time, he started to radiate this menacing air that hadn't been apparent when we first started talking to him. He didn't get angry directly at us, but it was like he was demonstrating how scary he could be, and suggesting we stay on his good side. Finally, he took me aside and slipped into a, not very convincing, Russian accent. Alas, he was never a spy for the US. He was a double agent, a one-man Russian sleeper cell. But he couldn't bear lying to me, he had to come clean. Even though we had open tabs at the bar, my friend and I waited until the guy went to the bathroom, abandoned our cards, and dipped, post-haste. My ex-fiancé told me that if I were to get pregnant with a girl before a boy, he would push me down the stairs and make me miscarry, so we could have a boy first, as many times as it took. We broke up, and afterwards, he convinced me to talk things over with him. I got into his car, and he proceeded to calmly explain to me that it didn't matter if I took him back or not, as he headed to the expressway. I asked him where we were going, and he remained absolutely silent. He started gaining speed, but the pitch in his voice never changed when he finally spoke, and began a diatribe about our love, and how we would be together forever, no matter how many people wanted to pull us apart, and no matter if I saw it yet or not. I again asked him where we were going, and he said, a neighboring state, where no one would know or find us, with a very creepy smile, one that lives in my mind to this day, but I can't recreate. All very calm. I had to call my mother, and she had to talk him down, beg him to bring me back home. Added bonus, when I was back home, and refused to see him, he stood outside my family home, through all hours of the night, and started singing songs to me, over the phone, about how he was going to burn my house down, and kill everyone inside, if I wouldn't go outside and talk to him. Effing yikes. Reminds me of the story of a girl in my hometown that was a major headline in the city for months. She was 17, and had broken up with her abusive mentally ill 20-year-old boyfriend, and he began to stalk her and camp outside of her house. One day, he decided to climb up the house, and into her bedroom window, stabbed her multiple times in the head, set fire to her family home, and attempted suicide jumping out of the second-story bedroom window. By some miracle, she survived without any life-changing injuries. Her family's house didn't burn down like he intended, and he's been put away for a very long time. Last I heard, she's now happily married with a baby. When I turned down a guy, while walking back to my car with groceries in hand, and when I got to my car, he pulled up next to mine, and kept asking for a hug. I was like, F no, in my head, and told him, I got a boyfriend, sorry. He left, and I got in my car, and kept an eye out, to make sure his car wasn't following mine. His van was blacked out too, not trying to stereotype cars, but just made it creepier. I mean, an all blacked out van? My ex-boyfriend. He was already abusive and an alcoholic and very toxic, so nothing should have surprised me. But one night, we were hanging out, and just watching a movie and laughing about something. He went kinda quiet, and looked like he was thinking about something. He turns to me, and, with a smirk, goes, "You know I could just kill you, if I wanted to. There's just something about you, I sometimes just wanna kill you. I wonder how I would do it." I broke up with him a few weeks later, after I figured out a way to leave without him following me or attacking me. Creepy stuff. When my ex's dad told the story of the time, he put a wet towel on top of an anthill, and then threw the towel at my ex. The wet towel stuck to her skin, and she was immediately covered with ants, who bit her all over her body. He was laughing when he told the story, like it was the funniest prank. My ex told him that it actually hurt a lot, and it traumatized her quite a bit, and he just said, "Well, I'm okay, because I already asked God for forgiveness." My friend's fiancé went on a rant about how Charles Manson didn't deserve to be in jail, because he didn't kill anyone. He just went off, with no precursor to the conversation. He started it himself. I tried to ignore him, and he kept coming at me, and trying to convince me that he was right, and I knew it, but I just wanted to be politically correct. My friend has since passed away, and I steer all the way clear of that guy. My friend found a psycho, met her at the bar, and ended up taking her home. She decided it should be more than just a one-night stand, and suggested a date the following weekend. He obliges. Their first date was meeting her parents, where she told them how they were going to spend the rest of their lives together, where they were going to buy a house, the names of their 2 children, etc. etc. He dated her for about a month, and after they broke up, she started stalking his friends, not him. His friends. She'd somehow find out where we would be, and threaten us with lawsuits for ruining her life. I, through a buddy, met this dude we all called Ranger Dave. He was a 100% ex-Army Ranger with multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, multiple heroic medals, appeared all-round nice kind of guy. I knew him tertiarily on and off. I'd see him driving by, or bump into him in the grocery store, coffee shop, etc. He lived in town, and for all outward appearances and actions, was normal. One day, walking home from lab, he pulled up to me, and offered me a ride home. He knew where I lived, and had been there a few times for pre-games or hangouts, whatever. I said, sure, hopped in. Ranger Dave and I pulled up to an uncontrolled intersection. A 4-way intersection without stop signs on any side. More of a whoever gets there goes kind of thing. Really easy to navigate, not hard to see every direction. Well, for whatever reason, Ranger Dave lost his shit. The poor person, who had just pulled up to the intersection before us, started to go again, as they should have, no issues at all. Effing Ranger Dave floored it. Full throttle Dodge Ram 8F King cylinders, smashed the shit out of a Toyota Prius. Easily 0 to 45 in less than a second, full T-bone smasheroo. He flipped the F out. Screaming, veiny neck, monster. I hit my head on the windshield, split my forehead open. Remember, I had just gotten in the truck, no time to put on a seatbelt. I, concussed, noped the F out of that scene, after making sure, fuckwad didn't maim, or kill, the little old lady, that had no idea what had just happened. I gave her my info, told her that I had just hopped into his truck, seconds before, for a quick ride home. then called the police. He effing left. Drove the F off. I kept seeing him around. F Ranger Dave. I was casually dating a guy for roughly 5 months. I moved into a new apartment, and had sent him pictures of the interior before I moved. He went on a trip to Scotland, and got upset that I wasn't answering his FaceTimes in the middle of the night. I decided I wasn't interested in pursuing anything further, because of his persistent pestering and insecurities. I had moved in, and was working on unpacking, when suddenly, I got a knock at my door. He found where I was living, with just a picture of the hardwood floors and some windows. I don't have my location for my photos turned on, so, there's no way he could have found it from something simple. He saw absolutely nothing creepy about it, and proceeded to push the door, and beg me to let him inside. I promptly shut and locked the door, then made sure he heard my shotgun cock. He left, and I haven't heard from him. Thankfully. One day, I was driving home from work, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, bright sunny day. I see a man hitchhiking from the one town that is south of my town, so, I figure, I'll pull over, give the guy a ride. So, he jumps in, he's got a knapsack on, throws it in the back, thanks me so much, and off we go. So, we're chatting, and he tells me he's trying to hitchhike about a 7-hour drive north of where we are right now. I tell him I can take him about 45 minutes north. All's good start, asking why he's going there, and he says, oh yeah, he wants to go camping up that way, he's got to retrieve something, and I'm like, oh that's cool, okay, what are you going for? He goes, well the police are after me and they have been trying to find me for quite a while, but I just keep changing bodies and that way they can't find me. So, I've left a body up near this town, and I'm going to switch into it, and then once I do so I can hitchhike across the country safely. This guy did not change his voice, change his look, he didn't all of a sudden go Mr. Super Creepy. It's not like he was trying to fake me out, he said it, like, it was the most normal thing in the world. So, now, we are out in the middle of the countryside, I have to keep going, until we get to my town, before I can get this guy out of my car. Normally, I would have driven through town, and let him go on the other side, but I pulled in right downtown, said sorry, I've got to go into this store, you'll have to jump out here. And I went into the store, and waited for him to walk away. Fortunately, he didn't kill me, and take my body. Or did he? I walk my dog at the same time daily, you tend to bump into the same people, routines and all that. See a woman with a Bernese mountain dog on a rope lead. I've not seen her before, and this dog is at least twice her size, so I'm a bit cautious about opening the gate to the park. Assure myself, it's fine, she can control it, and I'm just being needlessly anxious. As I open the gate, and go through with my Jack Russell, I watch as the mountain dog bolts towards us, barking. The woman holding him gets pulled off her feet, and lands on her shoulder hard, with a loud groan. Quickly scoop my dog, and go back through the gate, slamming it shut behind me, as I can hear this woman yelling over, it's okay. He's friendly, he just wants to say hello. As this big bastard is jumping up at the gate, barking and snarling. As I back away from the gate, she yells up from the ground, I'm a effing pussy. Don't be such a pussy, say hello. He just wants to play with your dog. Such a surreal turn of events, I have no idea what the hell was going on with her, or that hellhound, but decided to walk quickly home with my dog, and leave her on the ground, with the snarling hound at the gate. This was about 3 years ago now, but I still wonder, what the heck this woman's plan was, and did she just want me to get attacked, or my dog attacked? A few months back, I ended things with a close friend. We had known each other since sophomore year of high school. So, we practically grew up together. A little while into our friendship, he was very dependent on relationships, and when they would end, he'd spiral really badly. One relationship in particular made him absolutely crumble. I would help through the grief process, but it became intense, and his need for comfort became suffocating. Then even his own mother would call me to comfort her son. And if I had no time, or just wasn't comforting enough, he would lash out and yell. Even called me once, to show me how he ripped and stabbed his ex's belongings that were left at his house. At that moment, I began to see his true colors. One day, we were talking, and I had brought up a past argument that I thought was funny. He got mad, and lashed out, saying, well, I didn't know it would hurt your feelings. It took me aback and just something clicked in me, that I couldn't have a person like that in my life. Months passed, and I'm approached by a friend who is friends with him. She ends up telling me that he has a police report, and has been reported to his college for spreading CP of his ex. It was a shock, because I had no idea he had dated a minor. That's when I realized, oh shit, he's a psychopath.